Hey, everybody, welcome to the Dream Big podcast. I'm so glad that you're on. Hope it's been a great week. And the best part about hosting a podcast, you get to have your friends on. And Eugene Cho has been a friend of mine for a long time. He's doing just such beautiful work in the world. And I just have this desire for you to hear from not only a person who loves God a lot, but loves people who are hungry, that are dealing with some hard stuff, and he's jumped in. He's been with One Day's Wages. He is the founder of that, and then is now president of Bread for the World. And so I'm really just delighted to introduce you to my friend Eugene. Eugene, how you doing, buddy?
Bob, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you. And it's been quite a few years since you and I connected. And this is great for us to be able to talk again.
It has. I can just remember sitting around a table with you. We were in Florida, I think, the last time, and just talking about life and how complicated it can be between like faith and all the questions. And sometimes there's a lot of angst about a bunch of issues in faith. And one of the things that's been the drumbeat, and among the many things I respect about you, is that you just take this idea of loving your neighbor in a really practical way. So take us on a little bit of the adventure of what's it been like to be you. You had a church, wasn't it Quest Church in Seattle?
Yep, my wife and I planted a church many, many years ago. And after 18 years, we stepped aside. But during that time, I've written a couple of books. I've been speaking, trying to encourage pastors and ministry leaders. And we continue to lead this organization called One Day's Wages, where we try to inspire people to give up 1 day of their wages at least once a year. And then, as you noted, about 3 years ago, assumed the role of president at Bread for the World.
I'm so glad that you're doing that. I think the reason that they have you and I speaking at the same place is that I'm like just super fun, and you're fun too, but you're also super deep. we need a little depth to go with that fun. So I know that's your voice in my life, is not a solemn guy, but a serious guy when it comes to taking these things. I was hungry and you fed me. And the idea that if you want to meet Jesus and you don't want to meet the hungry, you're not going to meet Jesus. Like that's actually, that wasn't my take on things. That was his take on things. That if you don't find hurting, lonely, isolated people, then you won't find him, because that's where he always is, with hurting, lonely, isolated people. Tell us about some of the things that are prompting you, like in your life right now. What are the kind of larger messages of life and faith, and integrating what you do as a day job as well?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I would like to go on the record to say that I am also fun. I do have some jokes.
You are.
So I want to go on the record, make it very clear to the internet that I am a fun person. I'm trying to convince my kids that I'm a fun person. But I think in regards to your question about why issues of hunger and justice matter to me, there's a couple of reasons why. One is, as followers of Jesus, we try to follow the way of Christ, and we know that Christ cared about those who were hungry and vulnerable and on the margins, just as you just noted. And I think it's really important for us to just realize that following Jesus is not just about a set of rules. It's not about organized religion. It's about following the heart and character of Jesus Christ, who gives us a glimpse of the kingdom of God, who gives us a glimpse of the Father's heart. And so, we can speak more about that, but that's the first reason, is that I want to follow Jesus. I want to take this faith seriously, because I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. The second reason why this matters to me is because it's very personal. My parents were both born in extreme hunger and poverty. My father was born in what is now called North Korea. And the stories that he shared are absolutely incredulous, whether it's pulling out grass from the ground to consume it because he had nothing else to eat. And sadly, those are not just stories from 60 years ago. These are still things that are happening around the world today. My wife and I, we were on food stamps when we began our church about 25 years ago. And those were really difficult times. And was it not for the safety net of this program called Women, Infant, and Children, in addition to the generosity of Christians? And so we experienced that difficult season of our lives. And we know that right now, about 15% of American households, including about 12 million children, don't quite have enough food to eat. And that obviously concerns us, as it should concern the church. And so those are some of the reasons why it matters to us, and why we've chosen to start One Day's Wages, and why we've chosen to lead Bread for the World with advocacy and trying to urge our elected leaders to do their part in helping end hunger in our nation and around the world.
One among the dozen things that I like about you is that I think I remember a story when I must have been listening to you speak. Weren't you working like as a janitor at Barnes and Noble or something as you were starting the church? I mean, you were just scrappy. Is that an accurate way to describe you?
Well, I mean, so scrappy is a word that my coach would often use to describe me as a high school athlete. And, I think the reality is when you believe in something, there's nothing in the Bible that says everything is going to be perfect and rosy and blissful. And yet the good news is that God is with us, that Jesus is near. And I've always believed that Jesus is near, that Jesus is with us. But it hasn't always meant that everything was going to be perfect. And so the prime example that you highlighted is that when we began to start our church plant, I had a plan. I had an Excel sheet. I had an idea of how I wanted things to unfold. And well, it didn't quite turn out that way. And the next thing you know, I didn't have a job, didn't have a salary. I tried to apply for jobs at Starbucks, at McDonald's, at Jack in the Box, and people didn't quite know what to do with this Master's of Divinity degree from seminary, and I just couldn't get a job. And eventually, a congregant of my former church ran a custodial services company, and he offered me a job. And it was to clean Barnes and Noble. And it was probably the most humbling, difficult job I've ever had. 6 to 9 in the morning, Barnes and Noble, before the store opened up, cleaning 40,000 square foot Barnes and Noble shop. And I tell you, I have never been able to look at women's restrooms the same again, because it was really, really dirty. Has basically crushed any sort of impression that I had that men's restrooms were dirtier than women's restrooms, because that was not the case. But let me say this, Bob, I mean, as I look back at that story, it was really hard and really challenging. But when you're alone at a 40,000 square foot Barnes and Noble store, pretty much by yourself, you begin to have some really honest, raw, vulnerable conversations with God. And I really felt like God met me there at a very difficult time. And I had some of the most honest prayers, honest conversations with God during that time. And I still remember one of the things that I would say in my prayers: God, I'm so angry at you because I feel like I've lost control of my life. And it was one of those aha moments that we don't have control over our lives. And so we learn what it means to surrender and to place our trust in God. So yes, scrappy it is.
Yeah. I think the authenticity too, because dial back a couple years, and here you're getting your MDiv from Princeton Theological Seminary, and then you just this is not the arc that we were headed in. You weren't looking for applause. You've never aimed for that. You've actually you just have a humbler way of doing things, and I really like how you've navigated these moves from place to place. I know the awards you got, the recognition, 50 Everyday American Heroes, right? Frederick Douglass Award. But you like put that stuff aside because you love people, you know what you're about, and you're not afraid to make the transitions that'll get you there. So a lot of people that are listening to Dream Big are thinking through a transition in their life. They're trying to reconcile faith and family and the crazy part about finances and their desire to be faithful in their life and be generous with their life, but then also like dealing with the realities of, man, how do I make rent and put all this together? I think I've trusted your voice. You wrote a book called Overrated. Tell me the arc of that book. Why did you write the book? Authors oftentimes write the books they need. And so why that book?
Wow. Yeah. So maybe one side note is that for those who are contemplating writing a book, be careful not being overrated or thou shalt not be a jerk, because that's how people are going to Google you.
Yeah.
The number one Google, I guess, way that people are finding me, according to my publisher, is Eugene Cho, overrated jerk, is how they're finding me. So awesome. I'm trying to title my next book
Nice Guy.
Nice Guy. Yeah, exactly.
Fun Guy.
Yeah, Fun Guy. That's right. Eugene Cho, Fun Guy. Forward by Bob Goff. So thank you for doing that. No, I mean, it's a confession. That book is really a confession that I have been more in love with the idea of changing the world than actually changing the world. And that's the subtitle of that book. Are we more in love with the idea of changing the world than actually changing the world?
Come on.
And, I think it's, as you noted earlier, after a while, when you get some recognition, when you get a few awards, when you begin to listen to your own sermons too much, even though all of us, we try to be humble. Sometimes we can be seduced into being more in love with the idea of certain things. And so, I really felt, again, God kind of took me on a journey. And it was an opportunity to just be honest and confess that challenge, that temptation. And I think in our social media world, not to say that social media in itself is bad, but if we're not careful, we can be more about projecting a certain image than embodying it every single day when no one's watching you, when no one's necessarily following you. And so that book is a confession about the initial desire of wanting to do good things, about wanting to change the world, but to make sure that I'm living it out on a regular basis. I'm encouraged that I get to meet a lot of people like you who want to do good things, who want to dream big. And we should affirm that. We should celebrate that. But we should also let folks know that there is a cost. It's not a conference. It's not just a simple podcast. It's not simply a one little thing that we do, but it's living it out on a daily basis. And in many ways, that's the reason why I'm so fascinated by this person named Jesus Christ. I feel like he doesn't just preach an amazing message called the Beatitudes on the Sermon on the Mount, but he also lives it out on the daily. He lives on the margins. He seeks after those who are the least, the last, and the lost. And that's how I want to live my life as well. I think that's a compelling vision and a rule of life for all of us.
Kind of a neat thing to do if you have a family is just follow, say, the food chain. Find somebody who's a farmer that puts the seed in the ground. Find somebody who's a worker that harvests the lettuce. Find somebody in a restaurant that serves up the lettuce. Find the cashier that checks you out at the grocery store. Find the person that's the receiving it. Find the workout coach that helps you work it off. But what I want you to do is, if we get thankful instead of just saying general thankfulness, which is a really great attitude to have, but then get drilled down and get really specific and say, I'm going to make sure I know a farmer. I'm going to make sure I know a migrant worker. I'm going to make sure I know a person that is at the checkout counter. I'm going to make sure I know the person that bags the groceries. I'm going to make sure I know, and then give thanks for everybody. You don't need to just start with the subset, and then give thanks for the person that just made that meal and the person that served that meal. And it'd be kind of an interesting thing to just track through, because then once we're aware, we get our head on a swivel and we just start thinking. When you see the head of lettuce, you're saying, I know a farmer, I know a picker, I know a bagger, I know a checker, I know. And that will lead you to this awareness that we're like in this together. That idea of loving your neighbor. You can't love a neighbor you don't know. I can't say I conceptually love the guy down the block, but if I don't know his name is Bill and he's a widow and he's been alone for 3 years and he walks his dog, and maybe you know the name of the dog, but like that idea to just say, yeah, sure, I want to love my neighbor. I don't meet a lot of people that don't, but there's not a lot of people that end up knowing their neighbors so they can love their neighbors. So for a guy who does a lot of stuff overseas, and you do as well, I don't want to talk about going to the ends of the earth if I haven't gone to the end of my street.
Amen.
You did write a book called Thou Shalt Not Be a Jerk, and I don't want to miss the chance to do, because I know that's this in a season that we're in. There's just a lot of that going around. Tell me why you wrote the book. You could have written it on anything. Why that book? Why that title? Because I really want people to know the fullness of who you are, from the Barnes and Noble guy to the father of some kids, leader of a family, to a guy who cares for his parents, not just conceptually, but actually, so tell us about this. Thou shalt not be a jerk. What was in your mind? Why'd you write that?
Yeah. Well, the subtitle of the book is A Christian's Guide to Engaging Politics. And I want to just, again, be really clear. I'm not a huge politics junkie. I don't enjoy it particularly. But as a pastor who's trying to shepherd people to living faithfully during this time in our world, it was becoming increasingly evident that politics is like this pervasive idolatry. It's certainly an ideology. In fact, there's research that goes to prove that political ideology or affiliation is the primary ways in which people are now seeing one another. And so we're actually dehumanizing one another based upon who's with me or against me simply by one's politics. And in this book, I'm trying to convey that, of course, politics matter. And we know that it matters because it impacts policies that ultimately impact people. And every time I read the Bible, God cares about people, especially those who are vulnerable or marginalized or forgotten. But at the same time, it's really important for me to convey and to speak to an audience, particularly within the church, those who have altogether abandoned politics because they're exhausted. I'm like raising my hand right now. It's really easy and tempting to be exhausted by everything that's going on. And then there's also an audience, folks that, whether they know it or not, have become so immersed by politics, it has clouded the way that they see the world and see people. And so this book is kind of an attempt, an imperfect attempt, trying to encourage particularly Christians, the church, to acknowledge that our ultimate allegiance has to be to Jesus Christ, the lordship of Christ, the ethics of Christ, the kingdom of God, the Sermon on the Mount, but at the same time, to encourage people to engage the political process, not as the ultimate answer, but as one way, an imperfect way in which we try to love our neighbors. An example of this is the work that we do at Bread for the World. We're trying to advocate for certain policies which we believe are going to help and benefit our neighbors, even those within our own churches, our neighborhoods, our nation, and also those around the world.
Yeah, think of this when I think of the things that are pressing in on you, whether it's if politics is a big thing in your family or your community of friends, or even it can be sports, but to air gap a little bit between you and that thing you're seeing. If you and I, Eugene, jumped in a pool and we don't have anything on, everything's kind of blurry because it's just like the water's up against your eyes. You can't do it. You air gap that with a 1-inch set of like a little scuba mask, then all of a sudden you can see. And so with faith, if you're listening, and that guides your step to air gap a little bit between everything that's surrounding you and everything you're taking in, to just say, I want to see that with these eyes where God said, I love hungry, thirsty, sick, strange, naked. These are my priorities. That's on my to-do list. And then some of the things that are off to the side that are getting a lot of attention, I just want to see it through that lens. And you sometimes need to just air gap a little bit between you and all the pressing stuff of the day. So I'm not telling people what that air gap needs to be. If faith guides your steps, as it does mine, I'm trying to see things through that lens of faith. But if there's something else that you feel like is like the thing that gives you a more accurate view of what's going on, I'm just like a really believer. We just need to step away from the bus sometimes a little bit.
Sure.
You didn't step away from the church. You just said, I'm not going to be a pastor anymore. I'm going to pastor people in a different way, in a different context. You still, anybody who's been listening to this podcast, they hear a pastor's heart. They hear a pastor's voice in you. What do you think is the next little bit of time? We never know how much time we have or what direction we're going in, but we have clues along the way. Where do you think in the next couple of years will be the direction that God's leading you?
Yeah, Bob, thank you for that question. Now, I can't tell you the exact space that I think God's going to take me in, the next chapter. I can't give you details. But what I do know is that I want to continue to embody and exemplify the values that really matter to me. Values about family, about faith, about fun.
Yeah,
I want to highlight that again. I want to be able to exemplify someone that cares about compassion and mercy and justice. And I want to do this in a way that's not boastful, but I want to do it in a way that reflects humility and kindness and thoughtfulness. I want to exemplify empathy. And I know these are all words that seem very general, but I love the advice that you gave earlier, that when we're speaking about loving our neighbors, that we've got to think about people that we come across on the regular basis, that there's meat and bones and substance to the things that we care about. So I want to encourage people. Sometimes I think in our world today, we want to have exact turn-by-turn directions about our future. We want that kind of clarity. Some people have it, I don't. But I also learned when I was younger that that's not the exact guidelines that I want to live by. I want to live more by the values that guide me. And so that's the stuff that I know I believe will be in the next few years and the next decade and thereafter for me.
I'm just so glad you're not living your life, Eugene, like it's a business trip, all organized. And even though you have the ability and the Excel spreadsheets, but you're living life, as I've observed for many years, as an adventure. That God is inviting you into things and you're just responding with a lot of kindness and not a lot of flash and glitz and glitter, but just an authenticity and a faithfulness. And I think you're going to get those two words we're all hoping for at the end of the day, which is well done. You guys, you've been listening to the Dream Big podcast, my friend Eugene. I just hope that you'll check in on Bread for the World, see what Eugene's up to. He's not got anything to market or sell. He just wants to love people. I hope you heard that pastor's voice. without needing to be in a building that has a steeple on it, that he just believes that where we are is a place together on this earth, and that sometimes there's local churches that you might be in, but that all together, wherever it is that you come from, that if faith guides your steps, you can do something about it. So Eugene, thanks a bunch, buddy. Love to the family and greetings to your loved ones. I think you're on your way home to see him right now. Thanks for making some time on one of your many pit stops to log into the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, so much again for having me, and looking forward to crossing paths with you again very soon.
Access more